You've been lied to. Forget everything you know about the Middle East. For decades, news headlines and political soundbites have painted Iran as the eternal enemy. Israel is untouchable, and the entire region is nothing but chaos and conflict. But that picture leaves out a lot. From the myth that the region has always been at war, to the assumption that it's purely defined by religion. From the blurred line between anti-Zionism and antisemitism, to why many Iranians reject their regime, and how Western attempts to fix the Middle East often makes things worse. Here are 5 major things people get wrong about Iran, Israel, and the Middle East. Number 5. There is no Middle East. To expand a little on this, the Middle East is also not a religious bloc. So what exactly is the Middle East, and how do we come to group certain countries from Asia and Africa together? Interestingly, the term Middle East didn't exist until the turn of the 20th century when Alfred Thayer Mahan, a US naval officer and historian, used it in an article in 1902. Previously, this area of great strategic importance for Western allies, the United States and Great Britain, was referred to as the Near East. Mahan referred to the area around the Persian Gulf as the Middle East, emphasizing its critical importance for British naval power and control of global sea routes. Of particular importance was its access to the crown jewel of the British Empire, the subcontinent of Asia, India. Contrary to popular belief, the Middle East wasn't chosen because of religious ties in the region. Yes, at the time Mahan popularized the term, most of the members of the Middle East were once members of the fallen Ottoman Empire, but the geographical distinction wasn't made because of its close association with Islam. It really was just because of the strategic importance for the Navy in accessing the Far East. To put it simply, it's a term of relativity more than anything else. It's a region that's east of Europe, but not quite as far as China or Japan. Also, because this term is relative, the West has often added or excluded some countries from the Middle East based on ever-changing political and cultural dynamics. The core 14 countries, though, remain the same: Bahrain, Cyprus, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Palestine, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. A survey of 2,057 US adults showed that 81% were unable to correctly locate the Arab world on a map. The findings also exposed striking misconceptions. Over 20% of respondents believed Agrabah, that is, the fictional city from Aladdin, was real. 38% also said they would favor a travel ban on its citizens if deemed a threat. Despite these misunderstandings, most participants claimed to follow international news, though only 24% paid attention to Arab world coverage, and 50% felt US media underreported that region. While we're on the topic, Pakistan and Afghanistan have been referred to as nations falling in the Middle East, but not recently during the Middle Eastern conflict between Israel and Palestine. Pakistan, for its part, was once part of the Indian British Empire and therefore considered separate from the Middle East because of its culture. Afghanistan has also been considered largely separate because it doesn't necessarily fall in the Arab world. You'd think this would suggest that the Middle East is actually a religious bloc, made up of nations in the Islamic world, right? Well, Israel, the world's only Jewish state, is a part of the Middle East. While Islam is the dominant region, with both Sunni and Shia branches deeply rooted across the region, the Middle East has long been home to a mosaic of faiths, cultures, and ethnicities. Christianity, for instance, originated in the region, and ancient Christian communities still exist in countries like Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. Judaism too has its historical roots in the Middle East, particularly in Israel and parts of the broader Levant. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest religions, emerged in Persia, modern-day Iran, and the Druze faith, Yazidism, Baha'i faith, and secular ideologies have all played significant roles in the region's social fabric. Additionally, many Middle Easterners identify as secular or culturally religious rather than strictly observant. By reducing the region to a monolithic Islamic identity, this misrepresentation erases centuries of pluralism and fuels harmful stereotypes. Number 4. The Iranian people are not the regime. Iran has been treated as a threat, an enemy, and an antagonist by Western media. What started off with tensions between the United States and Iran has quickly turned into a PR war right before our eyes. The question is Iran truly the villain? Or is the United States trying to push an agenda here? The long and short of it is, we don't know. But what we do know for sure is that the Iranian people are not the regime, and the gross oversimplification that everyone in Iran is a mirror of the regime is harmful and inaccurate. So let's go back a little here to when Iran first became the villain. The Western vilification began sometime in the mid-20th century. While Iran and the West, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, once had relatively stable relations, things took a dramatic turn in 1953 when the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup to remove Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh had nationalized Iran's oil industry, previously controlled by British interests, which angered the UK. His ousting and the reinstatement of the Shah, a pro-Western monarch, created deep resentment among Iranians, who saw the West as meddling in their sovereignty. The resentment boiled over during the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when the Shah was overthrown and replaced with the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini. The revolution shocked the West, especially the US, and culminated in the US Embassy hostage crisis, where 52 Americans were held for 444 days. This event cemented Iran's image in the Western psyche as the irrational, anti-American extremist state. But the West was the catalyst here. The West led to the Islamic Revolution in the first place, and that's something not many people are entirely aware of. Adding to that, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the current supreme leader of Iran, has been in power since his predecessor's death in 1989. To date, that would make him one of the longest-serving rulers in the region, with a total of 35 years behind him. In response to the 2025 military confrontation between Israel and Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei framed the outcome as a decisive victory for the Islamic Republic. In his first public appearance after the ceasefire, Khamenei congratulated the Iranian people and praised the country's armed forces for what he described as a successful blow to both Israel and the United States. He asserted that Israel had been practically knocked out and crushed under the blows of the Islamic Republic, and used social media to proclaim that Iran had slapped America in the face. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump scoffed at Khamenei's assertion that Iran won the conflict, bluntly declaring, "You got beat to hell," and accused the supreme leader of spreading anger, hatred, and disgust in a tone that the president described as blatant and foolish. Trump also revealed that he intervened to prevent the assassination of Khamenei, claiming he knew the leader's exact location and personally ordered forces to stand down, saving him from an ugly and ignominious death. Needless to say that the West doesn't have the best impression of Khamenei, and that's exactly mirrored by some Iranians as well. As the nation's supreme leader for 35 years, it goes without saying that Khomeini has blocked free and democratic elections for his own benefit. That doesn't mean he doesn't have any supporters, though. Supporters of the Islamic Revolution laud Khomeini as their leader and would have him serve for another 50 years. But that raises the point that those people support the Islamic Revolution, and the fact is that not everyone in Iran does. A poll conducted by the Netherlands-based Gaman Institute of 158,000 Iranians inside Iran and 42,000 abroad revealed that 81% reject the Islamic Republic, with only 15% in support and 4% unsure. Among those opposed, preferences for alternative systems include presidential republics, 28%, parliamentary republics, 12%, and constitutional monarchies, 22%. The facts are simple. Yes, the West has vilified Iran, and yes, Khamenei remains a controversial figure. Number 3. The difference between criticizing Israel and criticizing Judaism. Additionally, criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic, although it could be considered anti-Zionist. And to start off this section, let's define what those two terms mean. Anti-Semitism refers to hostility, prejudice, or discrimination against Jews as a people or religion. It's a form of racism that has existed for centuries, resulting in violence, systemic exclusion, and atrocities like the Holocaust. Anti-Semitic views often include conspiracy theories about Jewish controls of media, finance, or politics, and attacks on Jewish identity, culture, or religion. Criticizing Jews as a group or targeting individuals or communities because of their Jewish background is anti-Semitic. Anti-Zionism, on the other hand, refers to opposition to Zionism, which is the political movement that supports the creation and continuation of a Jewish state in what is now Israel. Anti-Zionism critiques the political ideology, not Judaism as a religion or Jews as a people. Some anti-Zionists oppose the idea of any ethnic-based state, while others criticize Israel's policies towards Palestinians or its occupation of disrupted territories. There are even Jews, including religious or ultra-Orthodox groups, who are anti-Zionist for theological reasons. However, the line between the two can blur. Sometimes, anti-Zionist rhetoric crosses into anti-Semitism, especially when it uses hateful tropes. Conversely, not all criticism of Israel or Zionism is anti-Semitic. and labeling all such criticism as hatred can suppress legitimate political debate. That differentiation puts a lot into perspective. You see, the majority of pro-Palestinian protests throughout 2023 to 25 were anti-Zionist and focused on the condemnation of Israeli government policies. Yet, they were labeled anti-Semitic in media and political circles. Governments, university administrators, and pro-Israel organizations often equate anti-Zionist rhetoric with anti-Semitism. For example, Texas banned the phrase "from the river to the sea," citing concerns it was anti-Semitic. The evolving IHRA definition of anti-Semitism includes denying Jews' right to self-determination as a form of anti-Semitism, effectively branding broad anti-Zionist stances as anti-Semitic unless clearly framed within permissible criticism. But the baseline is, anti-Zionism is not inherently anti-Semitic unless it devolves into hate speech aimed at Jews as a people. Number 2. Has there always been conflict in the Middle East? A 2022 poll conducted across Western countries found that over 50% of those surveyed believe Middle Easterners do not share Western values such as support for secular politics, freedom of expression, or respect for difference. Additionally, many associate the Middle East primarily with conflict and violent extremism, rather than viewing it as hopeful or progressive. The idea that the Middle East has always been a place of constant conflict is more than a myth than a fact. It's a story shaped by colonial-era thinking and outdated stereotypes. Yes, the region has seen wars and unrest, but most of that is tied to recent political events, not some built-in tendency towards violence or division. In fact, the Middle East has a long history of peace, prosperity, and cultural achievement. Civilizations like the Abbasids, Ottomans, Safavids, and Umayyads ruled for centuries, overseeing thriving cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus. These were hubs of science, philosophy, and art. During the Islamic Golden Age, people of different faiths often lived and worked together peacefully. The real trouble began in the 20th century. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, European powers like Britain and France carved up the regions through deals like the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, drawing artificial borders without regard for local identities. Countries like Iraq and Syria were created with little input from the people who lived there, setting the stage for instability. The Israel-Palestinian conflict is often pointed to as proof that the Middle East is destined for endless war. But when you look at how it actually started, that claim does not hold up. The roots of the conflict are relatively modern. In the early 20th century, during the period of British colonial rule, the rise of Zionism began to take shape. Around the same time, large waves of Jewish immigrants began arriving in what was then British-controlled Palestine. These migrations, combined with the British government's conflicting promises to both Jews and Arabs, created rising tensions over land, identity, and control. Before all of this, Jewish and Arab communities lived together in many areas of the region with far less conflict. That doesn't mean it was perfect, but it was nothing like the large-scale violence that would come later. Things escalated sharply in 1948, when the State of Israel was declared, leading to the first Arab-Israeli War. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, and the conflict has continued in various forms ever since. Number 1. The Middle East doesn't want to be fixed. Tony Blair, the UK's former Prime Minister, has advocated for Western-style reform in the Middle East. But what does this claim mean? What does modernization of the Middle East entail? The global standard has been the Western standard. That is, the West is often seen as the most developed part of the world in terms of infrastructure, technology, innovations, and even ideologies. While some of that holds true, for example, we cannot deny that the West has better access to top-of-the-line healthcare and education. We also cannot say that the rest of the world needs to follow the West blueprint down to the T. We've already talked about how the Middle East became a topic of political interest sometime around the 20th century or more recently in the 21st century due to past and ongoing tensions. And we've also talked about how many people in the West seem to believe that people within the region are constantly fighting, citing fear for their own safety if Middle Easterners were allowed to enter their country. The solution, for a lot of people, including Tony Blair, apparently, was to fix the Middle East. Simply, this meant westernizing it. There's a recurring theme. The Middle East is broken, and the Western governments, values, or systems are its only solution. This attitude goes back to colonial times, when European powers drew arbitrary borders, set up puppet governments, and justified their actions by claiming they were bringing civilization to the region. Today, that same mindset appears in more subtle forms through regime change policies, democracy-building missions, or even through popular culture. Western governments and media often assume that liberal democracy, capitalism, or secularism are universal goals that every society must adopt. When Middle Eastern countries resist, it's painted as backwardness or extremism instead of a different worldview. The same pattern is seen in how the West handles topics like women's rights or religion in the Middle East. There's often a one-size-fits-all approach. Assume Western feminism applies equally everywhere, or that secularism is the only path to progress. But many women in the region fight for their rights on their own terms, within cultural or religious frameworks. That doesn't mean they're less progressive. It means their path doesn't look exactly like a Western model. This need to fix often ignores the fact that the Middle East is already full of thinkers, activists, artists, and reformers who are working towards change from within. Real solutions come from people who know their communities, not from foreign governments that often act in their own strategic or economic interest. The Middle East has long been misunderstood, framed through a Western lens that reduces it to headlines. But when we step back and actually listen to the region's history, complexity, and voices, a very different picture emerges. Iranians are not its regime. Israel is not beyond critique. And the Middle East is not a war-torn monolith waiting to be fixed by outstanders. If we want better conversations, better policy, and better understanding, it starts with letting go of old assumptions and finally seeing a region for what it is, not what we've been told it is.